in my experience. There's a couple of levers, and what you're trying to do is turn them all in the same direction. And those levers are managing your costs, helping the business grow, being able to make good decisions. And so it's not about cutting. If you cut, you're going to struggle to grow the business. At the same time, you need to be managing your costs and cutting your costs where it needs to be. So you turn that lever to the right-hand side. Then you're trying to do the things that help the business grow and continue growing, which requires a bit of investment or taking some steps within the business to make things operate more smoothly. You turn that one to the right. And then the financials, if you know all the details of what you're spending, your cash flow, your revenue, value of a customer, average profitability per service type, then you've got everything you need to make those decisions. You turn that to the right. So all the levers are pointing in the right direction. That means you're going to have a growing business because you know you're taking right decisions, you're pushing the business forward to grow, but you're also making sure you're not letting your costs go out of control.
Curious about the secrets behind successful business exits? Well, today on Leading with Integrity, I have the pleasure of speaking with Damian Connolly, a fractional CFO and advisor who specializes, among other things, in helping SME owners prepare for successful business exits. With over 20 years of experience across various countries, industries, and companies, Damian brings a wealth of knowledge in finance, systems, problem solving, and leadership. And in this episode, we'll hear about the big myths of finance leadership, the most common financial missteps that every business owner in the audience will want to avoid, Damian's insights on leadership, work culture, and the critical steps you should be thinking about if you're an entrepreneur thinking about selling your business one day, whether that day is tomorrow or in 20 years. So whether you're a founder or business owner or not, a leader, manager or not, or simply aspiring to be one or more of those things, there is something to learn from Damian's experiences and knowledge today. So don't touch that dial or that podcast app. Definitely not the skip button.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Damian, welcome to Leading with Integrity. Lovely to have you on the show. Lovely to chat with you again as well.
Good morning. Thanks there for having me. And I think I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, you're not sure yet. We'll see. Yeah. Well, I mean, on that note, over to you to start with, really. Kick us off. Tell everyone a bit about yourself, your career so far, what you do today, why you do it.
Okay. So probably the place to start is by trade, I'm an accountant. But please don't hold that against me. Originally from Ireland, trained in a small accountancy practice in Dublin. And since qualifying, I have been in a number of different countries working. The last 20 plus years in the UK, but I've also worked in Australia and the Isle of Man, and also done short stints in Hong Kong as well. So my career has really been the practice accountant, and then moved into more commercial roles, initially sort of offshore tax and offshore tax structuring. And then after that into more sort of traditional group financial controller, group finance director roles in typically growing businesses, fast growing in some cases, and also in a private equity backed environment for a period of time. So I think I've experienced quite a lot. And I think I've seen a couple of different sides of business and business owners and probably certain elements of leadership styles as well from time to time.
Quite a well-travelled career then as well.
I think so, yeah. Ireland, Australia, the UK, Isle of Man. You can't ever forget the Isle of Man. So reasonably well-travelled, and then I like to travel personally as well. And what I didn't say is actually at the end of all that, I decided to set up my own business, my own accountancy practice, Segura Business Solutions. So again, not only have I worked for other people, now I'm I guess, leading my own team and leading my own business. So I wouldn't put myself in a leadership professional space like some of your previous guests on this podcast. But I think I've learned it on the job, and I'm probably still learning. And I suppose I've learned in different environments, and I've tried to improve as I've developed my career and gotten a bit older and grayer, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. No, and there's huge value in that learning through experience and what you've learned, and we'll talk about that a bit later, I'm sure. I'm sort of curious. I know we didn't talk about talking about this, but from those different countries you've worked in, there's a pretty good spread around the world and around different cultures. So in terms of working cultures, what were the big sort of similarities and differences that stood out to you between all of these different countries you've worked in?
Well, they haven't been hugely different cultures. They've all been that, if I can use the term, English type environments or former English type environments. So maybe not hugely different cultures, but I think in Ireland, it's the stereotypes probably relatively close. People are a bit more friendly. They're a bit more talkative. Personal relationships are more important. UK, a little bit less so, I would have said. And then in Australia, it's a slightly different view of work culture generally. Again, reasonably friendly, nice environment to work in, but a very different view of work. I think it's much more work to live rather than live to work. So people tend to enjoy their lunches more. They tend to shoot off a bit early. They tend to be out at the beach or doing something in the morning and just getting into work to do what they need to do. So probably not great big culture changes. I can't say I've worked in Japan, although I wouldn't mind doing that, or in a few other cultures like in the Middle East. So not very, very different cultures, but slight variations in terms of how people work and how they approach work and some of the maybe innate ways of working in those different places.
Yeah, no, that's fair. I think you mentioned Hong Kong earlier as well, and I think that's quite an interesting place because it sort of straddles two cultures, doesn't it? Depending on when it was you were working there, I'm not sure.
Yeah, well, I won't get into the details, but I had to go out there for a period of time because there was a problem. So right. I spent 4 weeks out there, just working through a problem that we had within a business I was working in. And great place to work. Really, really fast paced. That's really a live to work environment. Everything's based around the work, the job. People start early, they finish really late. They don't tend to have big kitchens in their homes. So the food you have out, there's a huge variety of restaurants. Most of them at that time certainly were relatively inexpensive. So people tended to eat out. So it was a very lively environment to work in. So different, but very fast paced, very busy, very live to work environment. And I'm not sure it's necessarily changed dramatically, but that's the way it was. People started early and you didn't maybe get home till 10, 11 o'clock most nights of the week because you're either working, socializing work-wise, or you're just, having your evening dinner out before you went home to just go to bed to start again the next day.
Having lived in Australia for a couple of years in my youth, I have to say, I think they've got the right idea when it comes to like approach and view on life, but also work life too. It's that's the right balance in my opinion, but probably biased.
Yeah. Well, same. I quite like Australia, to be fair.
Yeah, I guess it's easier to be like that laid back when you've got such like beautiful surroundings everywhere. I don't know. I like here where it's raining all the time.
Well, I think the good weather makes a difference. I mean, I'm based in London, and I think there's a difference in London life in the wintertime and London life in the summertime. In the summertime, it's a lot more vibrant. It's a happier, more enjoyable place to live. But I think if you live somewhere where the sun shines pretty much every day, or it's bright every day, and from 6 o'clock in the morning you got bright sunshine coming in your window, I think it just change your mood and the way you approach your day and the way you approach your work as well.
Absolutely. It's a lot easier to have a bright personality when it's bright outside, I find.
Very much so.
It's a bit of a cliche, that, isn't it? But anyway.
It's true.
So moving on then, much as I could keep talking about Australia for hours quite happily, we probably shouldn't. It's not the right podcast for that, is it? Tell us a bit more about the work you do today and the process, because I know one of the things that you focus on is helping entrepreneurs get to a successful exit from their business. So you can tell us more about that sort of work that you do, and if there's any of them in the audience, like what can they do to increase their chances of that successful exit? Because it is a pretty low percentage of business owners ever manage to achieve that, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very, very low, actually. I think from memory, it's around about 5% is the number. Depends exactly what number you're extrapolating from, but it's a very, very low number. So having gone through a couple of exits in previous businesses that I've worked in, now as part of our accountancy firm, I focus more on growing businesses. So I do fractional CFO work with growing businesses, but then I also work with more established businesses and businesses where the owners are either coming to a natural end to what they want to do with the business, or maybe with AI, maybe they've taken a decision that they don't want to let the business drift over the next few years and perhaps be impacted negatively by AI, and they're deciding to get out now. Or in many cases, it's just age. You know, you've done it for 20 years, you've done the weekends, you've done the late nights, you've done the stresses, the payroll runs, and you've just decided it's time to spend a bit more time on the golf course or in Australia, whatever it is. But I think the challenge that I've found is that people tend to just leave it too late. So they make a decision to retire, to think about selling their business, and by then they're ready to go, or they want to go, or maybe their health isn't good enough, they can't hang around too long. And I would always sort of advise you need about 18 months, 2 years at minimum to prepare properly for a whole host of reasons. But the ultimate issue that I see with business owners, SME business owners, is that really they either don't get the sale, they don't get a sale away at all, and the numbers seem to speak to that, or they end up selling the business for what is a much smaller amount than they could have gotten given their years of work, their late nights, their weekends, than if they just put a bit of time and effort and a bit of planning into their exit. It can make such a big difference. And so that's, having seen it in practice myself, or when I say in practice, I've seen the amount of work and effort and money and investment it takes to get an exit away fairly successfully when you've left it too late. But if you're not really able to throw money at the problem, then it's really about time and doing things slowly and cautiously, and making sure you get your tax reliefs and making sure you're getting your money out of the business tax efficiently, and making sure you've got something tangible for a third party to buy from you. And as part of my CFO work with growing businesses, I help them acquire businesses. So I'm on the other side of the fence for those clients where I'm looking deeply into what we might be looking to acquire and finding all the holes and finding all the gaps and saying, we shouldn't, we should take this off the price, we should take that off the price, we've got a concern, we should maybe walk away because of certain reasons. And some of that then feeds into the work I do with business owners planning to exit, because I can see what the common problems are and what the common, simple solutions to some of those issues are. And some of them are quite simple and some of them are slightly longer term and more effort.
No, fair enough. I mean, it's something I probably should think about, but I think it's a bit more difficult for a solopreneur. I don't know. I don't know enough about it, but it feels to me like, what would be the point of the business carrying on? Yeah, I don't know who would buy that.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a solopreneur, it may just be selling a client or a particular product or a bit of IP you own. But again, it's probably going to be a smaller market, more difficult to do, but probably still doable if you think about it and plan it ahead of time and make sure you've got something marketable and get out and get in front of the people who might be interested in it. It can still net you something from that work you've done historically. But typically what I tend to work with is businesses that are, they've grown above £1 million or €1 million turnover, typically around sort of 2, 3, 4 million, where they've got a number of staff, they've got a number of trading years behind them, they've built a reasonably substantial business, and there is a market out there if you can present the right package, right. I kind of liken it to like a box. If you can turn your business into something that's a nice little box, and you can lift that box up and pass it across to somebody, then they can take it off you relatively easily. And that's, if we're trying to use an image or a visual, and I'm not very good at those, but that's maybe a good image for trying to package your business into a nice little box so you can pass across to someone else and they can take it off you without too many problems. That's what you're trying to do with your business.
Yeah. No, that makes sense to me.
Good.
Hopefully I'm at least a decade or two away from having to deal with this problem myself. But
yeah, you've got plenty of time.
Yeah. Which for me usually means I'm just going to put it off until too late. But I'm going to try and remember the lesson that you've given us there.
just 18 months, 2 years, 18 months, 2 years, and that's probably maybe not the optimal, but that's a good period of time to get the easy things done and to get some good progress on the slightly more difficult things as well.
Mm. Yeah, fair enough. And so a variation on this theme then, perhaps a bit more of a broad question this. What do you think, from all the experiences you've had and all the businesses you've worked with and for, what would be the most common financial missteps that you've seen companies make?
I have to probably go down the normal route of cash. Cash is typically the one problem or challenge that you see time and time again with business owners and businesses and the growth of businesses. People assume cash will come in, or they've got cash for a period of time, and then they take some decisions or they take some steps, and then suddenly they're struggling a little bit with it again. Or in some cases, maybe they are not close enough to the financials to know how much cash they have. So it can be both sides of the fence. It can be business running into trouble with cash, or I've had an example fairly recently with a client where they were very concerned about their cash, but they weren't able to get close enough to really understand how much they had or how much they were spending, how much they needed. It was only when I went in and spent some time and reviewed things in detail, I said, actually, you've got more cash than you need to run the business. In fact, you've got lots of additional monies available if you want to take it out to invest in this or take it out, to buy your dream home or whatever it might be. So they had a fear that they were running out of cash when they weren't, which is a great problem to have, but invariably it's a cash challenge or a cash problem that a business runs into, particularly as they grow, as they maybe the business owners get a little bit overwhelmed by the volume of activity, the volume of complexities, the changing face of business, bringing in new staff members, trying to delegate, maybe not ideally, not perfectly, and sort of losing a little bit of control. And that's when maybe cash then starts to rear its head in terms of being a problem, and maybe historically it wasn't.
Sadly, a familiar story, I think, to any entrepreneurs and business owners in the audience. It's certainly, familiar to me, rings bells.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having too much cash, that doesn't sound like a problem to me. It's a nice problem to have, as you say.
It's not, but if you're staying awake at night worrying about it, in fact you could not have been worrying about it for a year or two, then that's
fair. That is fair. Yeah. My follow-up question was going to be like, what should business owners be doing to avoid getting into that problem and avoid falling prey to that misstep? Which I sense might be either a really short or a really long answer.
The simple answer is you need to have a good accountant.
Nice.
Or in some cases, you need to recognize the importance of having a really good accountant in your business, because I've worked in business, particularly fast growth businesses, and fast growth businesses by their very nature are run by people who are more sales focused. And so, accountants don't always have the greatest image among business owners, but in very sales driven businesses, it's not unusual to be told that you're a sales blocker or you're preventing the business growing, when in fact what you're trying to do is you're trying to bring a bit of order, a bit of control to businesses to allow them to sell more and to get the cash into the business and to know how much you're generating and to know your profitability. So, that's key for any business, particularly as it's growing, because that's where then you run into cash problems or you run into customer service problems, which then impact your revenue and your ability to bring on new clients or to retain the clients you have. So I think it's the recognition of having a good accountant, and that could be a good accountant or the right people at the right levels in your team. Because again, as business grows, it's not just having someone like me, it's about having more junior people who can do the job really well and I can oversee that, but then also having someone who can point out the problems, the upcoming challenges, maybe do your cash flow forecast and point out where, you might need to take the foot off the gas a little bit or plan a little bit ahead of time. So that's probably one area I would advise business owners is get a good accountant, because also if you think about it, if you know of any successful businesses that are doing really well and consistently doing well, I guarantee you they've got a good accountant.
Yeah, that makes logical sense, doesn't it? The sales blocker phrase, that's a bit triggering for me as well. Not as an accountant, but as like a former like project manager and customer facing like operations type experiences. There were quite a few times in my career where I had that accusation leveled at me as well. And from my perspective, it was like, I'm not trying to stop you selling it. I'm trying to stop you selling something we can't deliver, because that's bad
Correct.
news as well.
Yeah. You're trying to put the frameworks in place to make sure the business can continue sensibly and on a consistent basis, continue that growth and not grind to a halt.
Absolutely. And it was a customer retention issue as well, because if you sell them something and then fail to deliver it because it's impossible, they're not going to come back.
Exactly.
So we're probably dancing around this question anyway. But what would you say if you could only have one of the big myths about the role of a CFO that you were allowed to challenge? Which one would it be, and why as well?
I guess from my experience, it kind of touches on what we talked about just now. It's about not having an understanding of the importance of a framework of the financials within the business. And that, because if you know what your financials are, you can make decisions, you can make the right decision, you can make good decisions, which then allow you to recruit the right people, to sell to more customers, to service them correctly, etc. But I guess maybe one of the myths that I've seen or heard a couple of times is, I've got a business that's maybe getting close to £1 million turnover, with all that brings along with additional staff and complexity, or you've gone beyond $1 million. You say, well, what do I need a CFO for? I've got a bookkeeper. Bookkeeper seems to be doing fine. Why do I need a CFO? And so that's one of the key myths that I would say needs to be busted, because a bookkeeper does the basics really well, or a good bookkeeper will do the basics really, really well, but they won't be able to support a business owner when they want to make decisions, when they want to evaluate options, when they want to look down the road a little bit, and maybe someone with experience can say, well, we did this before, I don't think we should do it now because these are the problems we had. Or someone who can evaluate from previous experience something to do or not to do based on something that they've done previously. And obviously, just like in any other professional, whether it's legal or marketing, there's people operating at different levels, which means they can't give you the support or they can't give you advice at a higher level. So what you're trying to do then is either you're trying to take on the role that a professional such as a CFO should be taking on, and you're not really equipped to do it. So obviously you're not going to make the good decisions you need to make, or you're going to be expecting something from your bookkeeper that they just cannot deliver for you.
Yeah, I think that's a fair position. So, like, I'm a big believer, advocate that leadership is something anyone can do, and it's not tied to a job title. It's not about a position in a hierarchy or anything like that. But at the same time, I think once you get that letter C on the front of your job title, that leadership bit becomes an explicit requirement, as opposed to a yes, you could if you wanted. And I also think it adds that kind of the strategic layer as well to the role. Whereas, yeah, like a bookkeeper in that example, or even just like a finance manager or whatever the next, I don't know what the job titles usually are on average, but that sort of mid-level management role, it's not fair to expect that same thing from those people all the time. So I think that's a big difference as well. Yeah. And not obviously not limited to the finance arm of the business either there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. So if you had to pick, like, what would be your favorite thing? What's the best thing about what you do?
The best thing about what I do. I'm being a bit esoteric here, perhaps.
That's all right.
But it's about impacting businesses. Because if you can do your job if you do your job correctly or do it well, you can really make a big impact to a business. And beyond that, I guess, you're making a big impact to the personal lives of a business owner or business owners. And also even beyond that, you might be making an impact to the lives of the employees. So maybe trying to bring that down into a more practical position is that, historically what I've tended to do is join businesses before I set up my own accountancy practice. I tended to come into businesses that were undergoing challenges or problems. So I usually came into a finance team that was maybe not working, that had fallen apart, that maybe over a period of time had just fallen off the wagon a bit and just wasn't delivering. And so the reason I'm there is because the business is beginning to struggle. And it goes back to maybe they're struggling with cash and they're suddenly having a panic about, oh my God, cash. Or maybe things just aren't working. The customer service elements are falling apart because different people are telling clients different things because they don't, one arm doesn't know what the other one's doing, etc. So if you can come in and if you can put in, sort out some of the processes, clarify what people do and where they do it and what they're meant to do as part of their role, put the right systems in place to make sure the right information goes in the right place at the right time by the right person. The processes then support that. And then you're working on the financials so that the invoices go out in time, the invoices get paid on time, costs are captured correctly, costs are reviewed and maybe terminated at times, et cetera, then suddenly you've got visibility of what your revenue is, what your costs are. You're able to evaluate who's delivering against what you're paying them. And you can look at the profitability of the business and either call a halt and say, we need to make some changes here because this isn't good enough. Or actually you can give people some confidence to say, this is what we've now got available and what's happening in the business. Make some decisions to make a change here to improve this, or make a change to improve this, or we can chase these clients and generate some more revenue. And that information can be very powerful in terms of what the business does, what the business owners do, and maybe what they're able to do to build out their team, to build out additional support, maybe to pay some of their staff a little bit better. And the working environment then can change. Instead of everyone running around like their hair on fire and just dealing with problems, which is quite demotivating. As an accountant, if you can come in and start fixing those problems step by step by step, suddenly people aren't running around with their hair on fire, fixing problems the whole time. What they're doing is they're doing the job they're meant to do ahead of time, proactively, and it makes their working life a lot easier. The business then can grow because it's now got the right information in front of it at the right time, can make the good decisions, can do the things it needs to do, can stop the things it doesn't need to do. And in some cases, what that means is business owners start paying themselves properly. Maybe can take out some dividends to buy that house that they've been trying to buy for years or go on that holiday. And employees can actually have a more enjoyable work-life balance, working environment. Maybe they're able to get a salary that's more commensurate to what they should be getting for the work that they're putting in. So in a long way round, that's impacting businesses, that's impacting employees, impacting business owners' lives. And if we wanted to add on something on the end, sometimes what that means is, the tax authorities getting their taxes that maybe they weren't getting paid on time, or the fact that business is growing means they're actually paying more tax, which is good for society if it wants to really go all out on the positivity.
Yes, well, I mean, good for society, subject to the government of the day and how they choose to spend it. But yes.
That's for a different podcast as well.
Yeah, so I really like the way, and I think it demonstrates the difference between a really good, great CFO and a maybe not so great one in your answer there. It's the way you couched it in terms of being able to make better decisions about the people, about the impact you have on everyone in that whole organization. Because I think that people mindset and impact thinking is really important, because especially when you're dealing with a struggling entity like the ones you've worked in. Because in my experience, the bad CFO will go in and it will just be about, sorry if this phrase is triggering, but it's about counting the beans, isn't it? And very quickly they're laying people off because they're trying to save money. And sometimes maybe that's necessary. Sometimes I feel like the bad ones, that's their first thing they do, regardless of whether it's the right thing or not. And I do think it is important to keep that impact you're having on those employees' lives in mind. And not everyone does, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, it's right. But also, to use another visual is that I kind of view it as there's a couple of levers for any growing business, in my experience. There's a couple of levers, and what you're trying to do is turn them all in the same direction. And those levers are managing your costs, helping the business grow, being able to make good decisions. And so it's not about cutting. If you cut, you're going to struggle to grow the business. At the same time, you need to be managing your costs and cutting your costs where it needs to be. So you turn that lever to, the right-hand side. Then you're trying to do the things that help the business grow and continue growing, which requires a bit of investment or, taking some steps within the business to make things operate more smoothly. You turn that one to the right. And then the financials, if you know all of the details of what you're spending, your cash flow, your revenue, average, value of a customer, average profitability per service type, then you've got everything you need to make those decisions. You turn that to the right. So all the levers are pointing in the right direction. That means you're going to have a growing business because you're taking right decisions, you're pushing the business forward to grow, but you're also making sure you're not letting your costs go out of control.
Yes, people are probably the most expensive thing in the business, but also there's no business without them, right? Unless you're going to do it all yourself.
Correct. Yeah, and that kind of ties into your leadership discussion generally.
Absolutely.
is that any successful business, just as it needs an accountant, again, I'm biased on this, but I think they need an accountant. You can't grow a large successful business without having people and good people. And that's maybe where the leadership comes in, is how do you get those good people? How do you keep those good people? And how do you maybe reward them or keep them on board for a longer period of time, which then allows you to go off and do what you need to do. And that's, I suppose, the essence of all of your conversation about leadership. That's kind of what it comes down to. And obviously the devil's in the detail, which is why we have these discussions, and you have these discussions every couple of weeks.
Absolutely. And that leads us very nicely into the leadership questions.
Okay.
The first of which is, so I'm trying to talk more about good and great leaders at the moment, because I feel like as much as it's kind of enjoyable to talk about, maybe not enjoyable, but enlightening to talk about the bad leaders, and there's lots we can learn from them, it can also get a bit tiring sometimes. For me, just hearing about all these toxic leaders in the world. So sometimes I need to remind myself about good ones. So the first question on this then, to start us off, is, in your experience, what does a good leadership role model look like?
I think it covers a few areas. I try and do it myself, maybe not always perfectly, but certainly from what I've seen from previous leaders and people that I've worked with, that I've enjoyed working with. I think a leader has to show some hard work. They're willing to roll up their sleeves. They're willing to put in the hard yards, put in the work alongside everyone else. So not asking you to do anything that they're not prepared or willing to do themselves. I think there's an element of, you need to have respect for the leader, and however that comes about, or wherever that applies. I think you need to respect the person you're working with. That doesn't mean they're necessarily the most technical person in the world and more clever than you are, but I think there has to be an element of, I see what they're doing, I understand, I respect what they're trying to do and where they're trying to go and where they're pushing and where they're pulling. I think that's quite important for any leader to have. And I think there's an element of likability. And likability doesn't mean everyone's friends all the time. I think likability is about, and probably touches on the respect side, you need to like the person you work with. They don't need to be your best friend. You don't need to agree with them. You don't need to love everything they say to you, but you kind of like coming into the office. You kind of like working with them most of the time. You view them as a nice enough person, and you're not coming into the office scared of them every day because that's not likability. So again, it's someone you can rub along with, you can work with successfully, you can do some good work with, you can understand when maybe they're not giving you good feedback, but also they will give you good feedback when it's appropriate. And it's that kind of balance of, likable, respect, someone that then you can see is putting in the hard work and not just talking a good game or using the right phrases, but actually not delivering on any of them.
That likability one, I think, is a little bit controversial. I see where you're coming from. I totally agree with the point and the other points you made, particularly the respect. I think that's got to be a two-way street, definitely. And I think, and I've said this many times before, but I think the onus is on the leader to ensure that respect exists, because you've got to start by treating your people with that respect. The likability one, yeah, I don't know. I think there's an issue there in a workplace setting because we don't always have a choice about who we're working with. Mm-hmm. So you're not always going to like the people you work with, ultimately, at the end of the day. How do you feel about the word relatability instead?
Yeah, I'm not stuck on the word likability because I think it's a little bit of a curate's egg in terms of slightly different things to different people. And certainly in the way that I work, people don't need to love me, but I'd like to think that they don't mind coming into work. They understand because I communicate reasonably well, hopefully, about why we're doing things and why we're pushing things and why we're pulling things and why certain things I'm not going to be happy about. But that I'm likable enough to work with, get along with, go home and say, yeah, I had a good day at work. I had not a great day at work, but it's fine. Tomorrow will be fine. So whether it's likability, relatability, but somebody you can rub along with and work with pleasantly enough, and without, as I said, without hating your job or hating that person or just not understanding why they like that. So that's sort of where I'm coming from with the likability phrase. So. Yeah, I'm not stuck on it. I'm happy to rephrase it. But
I think I see where you're coming from, and it's tied up as well in that question around should you be friends with the people you're leading or even working with. And again, that can be quite a controversial question. I've always thought yes, but then in hindsight, I'm not sure if I really was, or if it's just because that kind of deference to the top sort of human nature bit, and it is a difficult one. And then I keep coming back, though, to this idea of, which is a massively overused word, not just in leadership, but authenticity. And that kind of being not fully yourself, like don't bring your whole self to work, that whole thing, there's a big thing around that. But at least being genuine in who you are and, and then whether people like you or can work with you or not becomes their decision. And you actually, if they don't like you or they can't work with you, you want them to go. You don't want to kind of force people to stay in that environment that doesn't work for them for whatever reason that may be. But yeah, it is a challenging one, I think, particularly as economic times get worse. People don't always feel they have that choice anymore. So yeah, that's a good one. I like that. I like a little bit of controversial answers sometimes. It's good.
Okay, good. Delighted to oblige.
So with your understanding of good leaders in mind, then my next question is going to be, can you share some of your stories, some of your favorite stories perhaps of those great leaders, the good bosses that you've worked with or encountered in your career?
Yeah, I've experienced some less than perfect leaders as well, but I think as you mentioned earlier, let's push them to one side.
Maybe we'll talk about that another day.
Yeah, we could do it on another podcast when we're doing the politics and the Australian ones. We can do that one as well. Well, I always remember when I worked for a business in the Isle of Man, and it was a 45 person firm when I went in. It went up to 100 during the period that I was working there. Not all due to me, I hasten to add. But I always remember that the chairman of the business, who was the owner, along with his wife, he obviously wasn't involved in all of the day-to-day. The business was sufficiently successful that he was traveling a lot. He had other business interests. He had holiday homes in different places. But I always remember he made it his business that when anyone new joined the business, he would have a chat to them in their first few days or whenever he was back in the office again, just have a chat, say hello. And again, it was a growing business. He was very much a sales focused type person. So, the support functions like IT, finance were not really his bag. But at the same time, he'd make an effort, everybody, to at least meet them, say hello, welcome to the business. And what he also used to do as well was he'd walk around the office a couple of times a week. Throughout the whole office, he'd spend more time with the sales guys because obviously he could have very deep, meaningful conversations with them about targets and this and the other. But he'd walk around the business and he'd just say hello to everyone, stop and have a quick chat, and hi, I'm David, and who are you? Oh, we haven't met yet. Let's have a chat for a coffee later in the week. And then you mightn't see him again for another couple of weeks. So you might have, but again, it was something that was quite impressive from the most junior person in the business to those who were senior. He'd walk around the building, speak to everybody, say hello, talk about that finance stuff that I don't understand. How's it going? And you go, great. Yeah. How was the rugby or whatever it might be? And so I always found that quite a nice leadership approach, and I quite appreciated it. And I thought it did have an impact on everyone in the business. There was a real willingness for people to work for the business for him. And again, it wasn't anything amazing, wasn't anything, it wasn't a huge amount of effort on his part, but it's something he did, and he did consistently, and it did seem to, really make quite a difference to how the business felt and how the employees in the business felt. So I think that's good leadership.
Yeah, no, I'd agree. It's quite often, it sounds like a small thing, but quite often it's those small things that make a difference, isn't it? And that people will remember. Particularly when there's that difference in the relative positions, because it is very easy, and probably no one would have blamed him if he just didn't do that. He just went to the board meeting, didn't talk to anyone, and then left again.
Yeah.
And that's sadly, that's what people probably expect. And I think that's another reason why it works so well when they don't, because you're going against those expectations, but in a good way. And you're creating that memorable kind of point of connection with people. And it's triggered a memory in me as well. Very similar situation. This was many years ago now, but in a business where there was maybe not great leadership generally, but there was that highly senior person. They were on the board. They came to board meetings every couple of months, and that was it. That was the only time we saw them. But every time they were in the building, they made a point of coming around, looking everyone in the eye, shaking their hand, saying hello, saying thank you for your work. And almost to the point that the leaders beneath them in the structure were sort of hopping from foot to foot, getting a bit nervous. Why is this person talking to the minions sort of attitude?
Yeah.
and again, that made it memorable because it wasn't the expectation. It wasn't the way the rest of the leadership in that business was choosing to do these things. And it sticks with me to this day. Really genuinely nice person, I think, is the memory that sticks in my mind of that person. And it does make a difference. It makes you feel a bit more valued.
Yeah, it does. Definitely.
Yeah. So what is then the most important leadership lesson that you've learned in your career so far? Because you never know, there might be another one in the future.
Well, I've touched on people. I think the older I get and the more I see actually keeps coming back to people, and people is a bit of an issue at the moment because it's challenging for businesses across the spectrum to get people and to get the right people. But I think it also highlights how important people are. And if you can get the right people in the right places, doing the right jobs with the right approach to their job, it makes things so much easier. And all it is then is about just communicating with them, keep them ticking over, and hopefully rewarding them when you sell your business, etc. So it comes down to people. If you get bad people not doing the jobs they need to do, then it impacts the business. If you can get good people, it really strengthens the business. And again, if we talk about exit, that's one of the key things that if you can say, I've got a really good team, you don't need me because I have a great team. What we're selling is the business, the consistency, the process, and the people who are all keen to continue, keen to keep doing their job, keen to take responsibility. Again, that adds a lot of value when you're departing the business. But while you're building the business, again, it's really, really, it's key. And that's why leadership is so important, because identifying those people, training them, keeping them on point, keeping them doing what they need to do, identifying when they need to be moved or changed or pushed a little bit, and then rewarded. That's the detail that makes the difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think that point about being able to step away, you don't need me because there's a great team. I think there is a a mechanic there to be aware of as well, though, around loyalty and quite often the personal nature of that loyalty. So how do you kind of ease that transition? Because people don't deal with change very well as a rule. So if they're there and they're a great team when they're working for you, and they've got that personal loyalty to you, like how are they going to feel if you sell the business and disappear and they're working for someone else that they don't know? I mean, whatever you see, any stories around that sort of challenge or not?
I think a lot of it's around communication. I mean, most people, they kind of know. If you tell them and explain things to them, they kind of know what's happening. They know in their bones you're not going to be in the business forever. They probably know they're not going to be in the business forever. So it's really about, getting the communication right. And if you've got a good team working together, they know what they're doing, the processes work, the systems. They may be quite loyal to you, but actually just because someone else is at the top of the chain and they can continue doing the job they've been doing and the way they've been doing it, that's probably enough. As long as you tell them in advance what you're doing, why you're doing it, maybe how it's going to benefit them or help them in their career, then there's no reason why that shouldn't work. Obviously, when you come to selling a business or doing an exit, there's always going to be people who drop away. There's always going to be people who say, look, I don't want to continue. But if you plan it well, if you prepare people well, if you communicate it well, if you try and get the right buyer who understands the value of people as well, then a lot of that should be mitigated reasonably well. And so, there are a lot of businesses that do get sold ultimately, and people do stick around. The businesses do continue. There's always a bit of a attrition as part of that as well, but it's about trying to minimize that or minimize it for a year or two afterwards when the business is ticking over for 12 or 18 months, and then you can get more people in doing the right things, following the same processes.
Yeah, fair enough. I think you're right. It's a communication thing, isn't it? And I feel like that's probably one of the more common mistakes where you're relying on the team for the value and you forget to tell them, or you don't want to tell them, or you're worried they'll leave if they find out the business is being sold and all this. And then what happens is it's a shock to them, so they're more likely to leave.
Yeah, but also they will apply their worst fears to something if you don't fill it with what's actually happening. And so that's where it comes back to communication. And again, there's the devil's in the detail, but you can't tell all your staff when in the middle of an exit process. You've got to be quite careful about who you tell and when you tell. But when you tell everybody, there needs to be good communication to tell them exactly now what's happening, why it's happening, what the future looks like, what it looks like for them, that kind of stuff to mitigate it, because you're not going to prevent it, but what you're trying to do is mitigate it. And hopefully then people then can work their way through it, see that what you've said is correct, experience it and go, okay, it's not as bad as I feared, and it's not too far away from what you communicated to us. And then people will at least give it a go.
Yeah.
And that's all you can ask for. And then it's out of your hands and in someone else's hands. And you'd hope that if they're the right type of buyer, they will want to try and keep as much of your team together as possible to protect their investment, if nothing else.
Well, yes, that too. I think it's also an interesting, it's an opportunity you can give to these people as well, like what advancement opportunities, taking a bigger role in the business, taking on more responsibility, that sort of thing. And if there's money coming in as well, potentially pay rises, who knows? But yeah, I think there's ways to handle it that are good and ways that are, as you say, to be avoided.
Yeah, exactly.
On the subject of common mistakes, more generally speaking, in terms of leadership and management, what's the most common mistake that you've seen business owners make?
I would take the view that a common mistake I've seen that can be avoided is a bit of the when is enough approach. Because sometimes business owners keep working, keep pushing when, there's no need. They have enough, they've done enough, they've seen enough. How much more do you need? And also, if you've been working 12-hour days and, you don't need to work 12-hour days anymore because you've got the team and the business to a certain size, why keep working 12 hours a day? Why not work 3 or 4 good hours unuseful stuff for the business or for your team, rather than pushing to the nth degree like you always have, just because you always have. So I think there's an element on both sides. It's about maybe enough is enough, money, wealth, etc., but also enough is enough in terms of maybe personal approach and personal effort, because no one in your team is going to begrudge you if you say, actually, you don't really need me around 5 days a week and working weekends. How about if I come in twice a week and did these specific things with you, did some training or told you what the business development piece was, and you may then find people go, that's great. The fact that you're not here even more gives me more opportunity to improve my skills and take more responsibility. And also then for you, for example, you mightn't have your spouse then saying, well, why are you always away? Why can't we book these holidays? Why can't we do this? So there's an element of quality of life about it on one side. And then on the other side is, if you've made your money and you've got most of what you need, then you don't need to be pushing. Maybe that's the time to exit, or maybe that's the time to then say, now I'm going to improve my quality of life and take my foot off the gas. So that's probably the one thing I've seen that seems to be relatively consistent with some business owners.
Yeah, I mean, there's maybe a bit of a social commentary there as well, isn't there? And whether we really need billionaires and things like this, like people earning more money than they're ever going to be able to spend in like 70 lifetimes or whatever. And I think there's that sort of social pressure that's what success looks like. I think probably is a lot of the reason why so many entrepreneurs find it really difficult to stop. Well, not just entrepreneurs, I guess, anyone with a job, really. And I think that's why we're seeing things like burnout on the rise and stress at work and disengagement and all of this sort of thing. I mean, there's loads of statistics around that we could quote, but I won't. Because of that old truism about statistics. I think there is also, though, there is something in leadership about being present. And I think it probably comes back to communication again. Like if you want to step back a little bit, work less hours in the business, etc., I think that's okay if there's a conversation first, and if there is someone else or there is other leadership in place. Because at the same time, I've, again, biased by my own career experiences probably, but there was an issue in a couple of businesses I worked in where that top leader wouldn't release the control, but also didn't want to be there. And so you have that kind of worst of both worlds situation where no one's allowed to make a decision, but the person who is holding the decision-making power, if you like, isn't there to do it. And it's, So I think there's, again, you've got to be a little bit careful about how you handle that with people, because and a lot of people, quite rightly, will be like, well, if this person's not going to work as hard as I am on their business, why should I keep doing it? So there's a dynamic there to be aware of, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it goes back to if you've shown you've done the hard work and people have respect for you and they kind of like you in some respect, they're not going to question if you've said, well, I've done this, we're at this point, I've got my team, everyone knows what they're doing, I don't need to be here, I've got other things to do. What I'll be available for is this and this and this to help the business or help you along. There's no reason why that shouldn't work, broadly speaking. But to use your example, it goes back to, what's the worst decision a business can make? It's not whether it's a good decision or a bad decision. The worst one is no decision.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. And same with leadership. Like it's quite often like an absent leader is more damaging than a bad leader.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Again, biased by my own experience, I'm sure. But right, Damian, I've lost track of time. Are you okay? We've got 2 questions left. They're kind of fun ones, though. They're not as serious as the others. So
yeah, fine.
Okay, here we go then. Yeah, so the first of these is the time travel question, because who doesn't love time travel?
Okay.
So if you could go back in time and start your career over again, is there anything you would do differently?
Not really, except there were a couple of points where I had to make a decision one way or the other. And maybe I'd go back and change and see what happened. Mm-hmm. But broadly speaking, I'd say I'm happy enough with the decisions I've made. So an example is I was offered a very senior role, which would have led to a more senior role at a certain point in my career. and I decided against it because I wanted to travel and experience other things. Now, accepting that role probably would have made me a lot wealthier, probably would have, given me more senior opportunities across, the UK, etc. But I wanted to get out and get away and experience things more widely. So sometimes I think maybe I should have taken the other one, but it would have been maybe a smaller, more cosseted life. And the second one was I made a move from a business I'd worked in for a number of years, and I wanted to try something different. And I had two choices. I had two offers, strangely. And one was for a private equity-backed business that looked quite interesting and could have done some great things. But I wanted to try something completely different. So I joined a business that was looking to get onto the junior stock exchange in the UK, the AIM. And I wanted to just experience going through that process of trying to get regulated and going through all the regulatory pieces to get. And it turned out it was a disastrous decision, really, really disastrous decision, terrible business, never was going to get anywhere close to getting regulated. And then I thought I really should have gone for the easier decision, the more simple, instead of going all out on something very, very different. So I'd probably change that one in hindsight, but that's probably it, really.
Yeah, I don't know. I think you learn more from when things go wrong.
It definitely went wrong.
Yeah.
Definitely went wrong. And it meant instead of starting a job quickly, I then had 6 months of hanging around waiting to get a new job. While I was thinking I should have just gone for the one that was a bit more of a better fit.
Yeah, fair enough.
That's probably about the extent of it, really. Two slightly different circumstances.
Yeah, and I think the first one, I don't think we have regrets necessarily so much. Most of us, anyway. At least not in career stuff. But there is that curiosity, isn't there? That's always going to be there. Like if you had the chance, you would, just to see what happens. Like, because I'm a little bit the same. I have absolutely no regrets about my career decisions, particularly like the biggest and arguably on paper the stupidest decision I've ever made, which was to leave a relatively comfortable job, at least financially, and set up a business by myself with no real idea at the time of what that business was going to do. It wasn't the best decision. Like at the time, it didn't feel like a decision because things had got so angsty and stressful and unpleasant.
Yeah.
That if I'd stayed, my mental health was declining as it was, it would have been worse. But on paper, as I said, really dumb decision. But for me personally, right decision, 100%.
Right. Yeah.
Very glad I did it. Would I go back and change it? Maybe out of curiosity, just to see what actually did happen next. But realistically, no. Happy with the decision I made.
Good. Yeah.
Life's funny like that, I think. Right. Last question. Some people find this the most difficult one of the show. I don't know how you're going to get on with it. We'll find out. It's leadership heroes.
Leadership heroes.
So if you had to pick one person, but it can be literally anyone you can think of, so they could be alive or dead, past or present, real or fictitious, anything like that, but someone who, in your opinion, would perfectly embody leadership, who is that going to be for you and why?
So I've got my notes here on the two leaders. I've got two. One, a very quick one. The other one is probably the real one.
Okay.
So being Irish, I can't possibly pass this moment and not mention Michael Collins, a great Irish leader and hero of the past. Probably the reason he is such a hero in Ireland is because he died early, so he couldn't make any mistakes after he'd done some of his heroic work. So I have to mention him. But actually, the real answer is a person called Ataturk Kemal. So you may or may not be aware of that name, but I did a project when I was in school on this person. And he is the hero or the leader of modern Turkey. So after the First World War, when the Ottoman Empire collapsed, lots of individual countries and peoples were taking over parts of the Ottoman Empire and turning it into their own. And at the same time, there was a bit of a dispute between themselves and Greece about which part of Turkey and Greece belonged to Greece and Turkey. And so out of the embers of the war, he became sort of a leader. He was an army colonel or general, and eventually he ended up sort of having the reins of leadership. And so what he did ultimately was he fought off the Greeks and secured Turkey's borders as they are today. And then he went into government and he turned the country around. He unified the country. He gave women's rights for the first time. He changed the language from, I think it was an Arabic language, into what Turkish is today. And it was a language that he pretty much designed himself. And then he went around and got everyone in Turkey to speak the language, and he promoted it, etc., etc., etc. And he put in a lot of the checks and balances that the country operated to for 50, 60 years after he died. There were a few army coups and so on, but they were jumping over the checks and balances that he had actually in place. So he's known as the father of modern Turkey, and actually through a really challenging period of time globally, he managed to take what was the embers of an empire into a coherent country, and he united the country by doing things that hadn't been done before: new language, women's rights, fostering an element of being Turkish rather than being Ottoman or being different parts of the Ottoman Empire. So really enjoyed doing that project, really inspired by the man, and really inspired by the fact that he could be a military hero and then turn around and be like a civic hero afterwards as well, and deliver all these changes, and most of them quite positive and quite ahead of their time. So, so he's probably my man, Ataturk Kemal.
Yeah, I mean, he's a really interesting example from history, I have to say. And quite rare, I think. Like, you don't get many army officer types who become peaceful civilian leaders.
Exactly.
That's quite a fraught process usually. But
yeah.
I don't think, no, you're not the first person to choose him, though, I'm afraid.
Am I?
We did have a gentleman from Turkey, in fact, on the show. I've lost track of when it was. It was within the last 12 months, definitely. It might have been before Christmas. Anyway, so he obviously chose him as well. But I mean, that period of history is so interesting in that part of the world in particular, things that are going on that we don't really learn about in Western schools. And the Ottoman Empire itself as well, like barely, it's like a footnote when you study the First World War, if you're lucky. But I mean, the history there, it was around when the Roman Empire existed.
Yeah.
And then it only ended after the First World War. Ridiculous period of history there. That's such a long time.
Yeah.
While all these other empires are rising and falling around it. I mean, feels like we should be taught more about that in this part of the world.
Yeah. And we could get into a different podcast about, the reasons why Europe is the way it is, and why you've got all these countries and nationalisms, and, why you have these wars, and a lot of it goes back to empire.
Yeah.
And how people, when they were in one country, they'd all just moved around wherever they wanted. But then once the empire fell apart, the wrong people were in the wrong places at the wrong time among different people, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So really, really intriguing.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm a big fan of history and learning from past mistakes. So always avid reader on all of these sorts of things. Michael Collins, I think, no one else has chosen. So you could have got bonus points if you'd gone with him. Just good. Not to sway your decision, but
I felt I had to at least mention his name on today's podcast. So a great man in Ireland, great leader, spoken about reverently. The only difference being he died young, which means he didn't have time to make mistakes and perhaps ruin his image.
Yeah. There's quite a few examples of that on there. Like, Abraham Lincoln, maybe not so young, but certainly died before he could go wrong. JFK. I'm just naming American ones now, aren't I? Let's move on. Lovely. Well, Damian, thank you so much for your time today. One final thing I will ask, or give you the opportunity, is if anyone in the audience would like to learn more about you, your business, what you do, where can they go to learn more?
Well, if they're interested in having a chat to me on anything that we talked about today, I'm on LinkedIn, Damian Connolly, FCCA on LinkedIn, and they can go to our website, sakurabusiness.co.uk, or we also have an Irish office, a smaller Irish office, so sakurabusiness.ie, and they're the best ways to contact me.
Lovely. Well, I'll pop those links down in the show notes so everyone can find them easily as well. And that's it. That's all we've got time for. Thank you so much for your time. You've been very generous with it and sharing your knowledge and experiences as well. And have a great rest of your day.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. Superb.
Thank you for joining us for that conversation with Damian. And I know every listener and viewer will join me in thanking him for his time, sharing his knowledge with us today. If you're interested in learning more about his work, you can, as always, connect with Damian on LinkedIn or visit his website. You will find links to both of those down there in the show notes. So as always, I do encourage you, click on the things, learn the stuff, reach out to the guest. I know he would love to hear from you. And for those looking to enhance their leadership skills and connect with like-minded individuals, do please consider joining my online leadership community. It's called Integrity Leaders, and it's a safe place where leaders like you can focus on ethical leadership, putting people first, overcoming imposter and confidence obstacles, and spreading better leadership around the world, one manager at a time. You'll find the link to that on the screen and in the show notes as well for those listening audio only. That's all for today. Tune in again next week when I'm chatting culture, signaling, trust, and leadership with behavioral psychologist and HR expert Adriana Vaccaro. So until next time, thank you again for being with us. Keep leading with integrity and be a leader, not a boss.